unless
You want to see his face?
No, facing you there.
Oh.
Yeah. Speed on B. Go ahead, Karen.
Interview, Porter Halyburton, take 6.
Could you say something, okay, there it is. I just want to make sure everything is operating correctly. So at your time at the Naval War College, you would have been there at the same time Tag Stockdale.
I was. He was a he was a president when I arrived in 1978 as a student, and so we were good friends. And his chief of staff was Render Creighton, who also became very close friends. He was a POW as well, and there were a couple of others that came through while we were there. So for a while there was a little group of us, you know, that had that commonality. But I was fortunate in having the opportunity to sit down with CAG, you know, and reminisce about things. And of course, he had been thinking a lot about his experience and what it meant, and been writing about it. And of course, his big achievement was having the elective courses, and then this special elective on foundations of moral authority, which he did with Joe Brennan, a philosopher that he had known, and they together wrote the curriculum for this course, and then they taught it together. And then when Stockdale left, Joe Brennan taught the course, and then when he left, somebody else took over. And right now, the course is still continuing to be taught by Tom Gibbons, who is doing a great job. So.
And were there lessons in leadership that became apparent to either one or both of you in the course of teaching these young people, but also with a little distance from Hanoi, did you look back and go, you know, I realize now that...
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's kind of hard to say. I have a difficult time in recalling exact conversations with him about things, but I just remember that he was so thoughtful about everything. I mean, he considered everything carefully. And sometimes it was hard for other people to follow him, because I think his mind was so far ahead of what he was saying, you know, that it sometimes came out as something different. But I know that even after he left, we remained really, really good friends. And Render Creighton and his wife as well, and they lived out in California. Of course, the Stockdales lived at Coronado, and Render lived in La Jolla, and we would go out to visit quite often. I lectured out there for the War College to our non-resident seminar program, and we quite often, got together for dinner and had Stockdales over. And so I remember one time, I had been curious about how Marty found out that I was alive. And so she said, well, Stan's wife, Betty, and I wondered why your status, meaning mine, had been changed to POW and Stan's had not. And so they together went to Washington and met with a bunch of people there to try and find out why that was. Betty was led off one place and Marty to another, and she was in a room with 4 or 5 guys from different departments and stuff. And they had a briefing book there. Excuse me. And so she was in this room with 4 or 5 guys, and there was a briefing book there, and she's asking the question, well, how do you know my husband's alive? And they said, well, we can't really tell you how we know, but we know. And one by one, these guys got up to go to the restroom or make a phone call or do something, and pretty soon they were all gone. And the briefing book is sitting right in front of Marty. And she figured, well, I'm supposed to look at that. She did. And there was a page that was redacted and so on, but it essentially was a report of a Vietnamese agent who had sent out my name. And she said, well, that's all they would tell me. They come back in the room, you know, and she turned the book around and they said, well, you have any more questions? And she said, no. And so that was it. That was the explanation. And I said, you know, that doesn't sound plausible to me, but you know, that's what they told you, that's what it is. So anyway, I had read Jim and Sybil's book, In Love and War. And I'd gotten to the part where Sybil and her intelligence officer that she was working with had come up with this. They worked with, I guess, the CIA to come up with this scheme of this invisible carbon paper, and they smuggled it in through a picture and so on. And I was, for the first and only time, actually angry at Stockdale because he had revealed something highly classified, you know, that we never would have talked about, you know, and we would never talk about, you know, means of communications that were classified. And so I was kind of irritated at him for that. And I guess I just didn't read carefully the rest of it. And so finally, after several years, I started looking up newspaper articles of the announcement that I was alive. Well, the article I found was 3 Navy flyers found to be alive. And it was Rob Doremus and Bill Frank and myself, all at the same time. So I noted the date and I started putting 2 and 2 together. I went back and I read the section of In Love and War again about this method of communication and actually what it was and what he put in that communication when he had the opportunity to use the invisible carbon paper. And among a couple of other things, it was the 40 names that he had memorized of guys that were there. And I was number 40. So CAG was the spy. He was the agent. And I had never really realized that. I don't think he realized that. I know he put the names there, but I'm not sure that he realized that the 3 of us came alive because of that. So we were in California and we were over at the Creighton's and invited Sybil and Jim to come to dinner, you know. And so I related that story to Stockdale and I said, you really were the spy and thank you very much. So, yeah.
Beautiful. So, sir, I feel that it's a question I want to ask you. I think it's fair to say, for me, you're one of my personal heroes. And I just think for the reasons with which you, on a daily basis now, but in the past, meet your life. But I wanted to ask you, what is a hero? And you've met a lot of heroes in your life.
Yeah, I have.
What do you think is a hero?
Well, it's not me, that's for sure. But it is, I think a lot of people who show that they are willing to sacrifice themselves for others and to do extraordinary things in order to try and help people in one way or another. And there can be many, many different ways. But it is, you know, it's related to courage in a way. You know, courage is a curious kind of thing. I think there cannot be any courage without fear. You know, there can be fearlessness in that, you know, guy can have total disregard for his own well-being, and that's different than true courage, where you're acting in the face of fear, maybe extreme fear, fear for your life, but you do it anyway. And I really think that that's the hero who presses ahead in spite of the fact that they're terrified, you know. And people can be heroic in so many different ways. And I know that this term is misused. It's applied liberally. You're all heroes. Well, we're not all heroes, you know. It's not, and you know, everybody's special. Well, in a way they are, but everybody's not special. So I think in our society we tend to downgrade the importance of certain terms by their overuse and their wide use, you know, hero and courageous and one, you know, excellent. And people use superlatives where there's no room to go above.
Sometimes people need heroes so they don't have to make the choice to be heroic themselves. It's something that exists beyond them, and therefore they can come to believe be there. True heroes are called upon to rise above.
Well, you know, I think that there's probably the hero, the potential hero in all of us. It all depends on circumstance, you know. You have to have the opportunity to be a hero, to act in a heroic way, to act in the face of fear, you know, to save somebody or do something for them. And not everybody has that opportunity. And maybe some people never would do that. Some people are selfish to the core and would never act in that way. I don't know. But that's an interesting thing that Viktor Frankl raises in Man's Search for Meaning. You know, he was in Auschwitz and he observed these Jews acting in different ways. You know, some were capos who were guarding and mistreating other Jews in order for them to survive. And others were making huge sacrifices in order to help other people. And I know that was a great question that Frankl had. What's the difference? What makes some people act this way and act that way? And I'm not sure he had a definitive answer for that question. But I think it lies somewhere in the inner core of the individual. Do you have a moral fiber or not? You know, have you just forgotten about it or lost, you know, haven't used it or what? But I know that some people never grow up in an environment where they're taught anything about the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do, about morality and about the good and the bad and all of that. They grow up in terrible, terrible circumstances. And so they grow up that way and maybe never realize the importance of right and wrong and ethical behavior in your life. But there are some who do, who grow up in the worst of circumstances and yet come to understand moral values and how to lead an ethical life. And that's what's a really remarkable thing about Fred Cherry, for example. It's a great example. He grew up in horrible circumstances, and yet he came out, you know, a very, very strong, motivated, heroic person. Yeah.
In the last couple of minutes here, I wanted the words "return with honor." This is called the Return with Honor Project.
Right.
I think that it has a meaning for you as POWs returning to this country. It has a meaning for you in your life. And you strike me as a person who has, as you said, you have three things that you attend to in your life: the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. Is that correct?
Mental and
Mental and spiritual.
And mental includes, you know, recreational and
Yes,
all that stuff.
yes.
Yeah.
In the spiritual aspect, one of the things that we want young leaders of tomorrow to think about is the consequence of their action, beyond just their leadership, but that it's a lifelong commitment. And so, for those who have a spiritual basis in life, who think in terms of some creative force or a God who has brought them into existence, do the words return with honor when you anticipate at the end of your life? Do they have meaning to you in that way?
Well, I'm not sure I've thought about it. Excuse me. I'm not sure I've thought about it in those terms specifically, but the return with honor was a terribly important concept at the time, and I think it encapsulated the whole idea that it's not good enough just to survive, but you had to come out with a sense of honor that you've done the best you can. You've failed, you've bounced back. That was one of the things. Everybody fails, but don't fail permanently. You bounce back. You come back every time. Make them work for everything they get. And so we have return. And so return with honor is a past concept. Survive with honor, live with honor now is the concept to me that motivates me, is to try and live my life in an honorable way, to try and help other people and not hurt other people, not do the bad thing. So I think that's a spiritual thing, whether you call it religious thing or Christian thing or what. But you do learn from your religious upbringing or your spiritual involvement about right and wrong, and about honorable and dishonorable, and about good and bad, and positive and negative, and all of those things. And if you let the understanding of that guide your life, then your chances of living that honorable life are much better. But if you never recognize the value of doing the right thing, if it's just all about making as much money as you can, however you can, then that's what you do. And you never come to those other conclusions about anything. So that's what I try to do now. I still struggle with things just like everybody, and have to remind myself of the lessons that I learned sometimes.
Yes. In conclusion, is there anything else that I might not have touched on that you would like to comment on or speak to, or anything else? And you'll have another opportunity. We're doing the B-roll. I'll probably ask you a couple of questions as well.
See. You were writing things down. What did you write down?
I gave them some of those.
We covered all the
We
ones.
covered all those, yeah.
For the most part. Here's a question for you. If you could go back 50, 60 years to you as a young man, and you could give yourself a piece of advice based on what you know now, what would it be?
Well, I don't know. There's so many things that I feel like I have learned over time. I mean, I'm such a different person than I was when I was 15 or 16 years old, making choices and not making very good ones a lot of times, that, if I could go back and say, I guess it would be that I would pay more close attention to the lessons that I was being taught, rather than rebelling, thinking I'm such an individual, and my mother tried to teach me so many things, and I knew they were true. It's just they were, at the time, just not what I wanted to do. And I've always been kind of independent and rebellious and so on. And I think I would, if I had it all to do over, I would enter into that period of my life with a much more positive attitude about things, because I tended to rebel against things. But down deep I knew, like when I was in the 11th grade, I realized that I was just goofing off. I was making good grades, but I wasn't doing any work. I was cutting class. I was, drinking and smoking and raising hell and all of this, getting by with it. But deep down I realized I really wanted to go to Davidson College. And so I knew I had to get into a different environment. I grew up without a father. So I did not have that kind of discipline that I needed, somebody to kick my butt, when it needed kicking. And so I was the one that said I'd like to go to a military academy. And my mother made great sacrifice in order for that to happen. And I did, and that had a great influence on my life. I learned discipline. I learned all kinds of things there that were important, that served me really well later on. I so strongly wanted to go to Davidson, I knew that I did not want to, if I had not gone away, I wouldn't have gotten in. And so I got an appointment from Sewanee Military Academy because I was a good military student, and they gave two appointments to 2 people a year, and I got one of them. And I turned it down, to go back to go to Davidson. And so there was some feeling there about doing the right thing, about having a goal and working for it and everything. And so, in a way, I overcame a lot of my weaknesses and foolishness and so on. But if I paid more attention to some teachers that I had and my mother and my grandparents, even though my grandfather said, it was not his role to be my father or disciplinarian, that was my mother's role. So he didn't do that. But so we all would like to go back and start again, I guess. But I have no complaints.
Exactly.
I don't.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right.
This has
Yeah.
really, truly been an extraordinary honor. I really.
Thank you. Well, I know you said a lot of nice things about me, and I appreciate that. But I certainly don't feel that way at all. I really don't.
Well, I appreciate your humility too. Yeah. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah,
What's up?
I just want to shake what I find here, just on that last bit of business.
Okay.
So I don't know if the card is
Okay.
just slow forward.
All right.
I'm kind
Okay?
Yes.
All right, because they're gonna kick us out at 5.
Pack up.
Oh, we do.
All right, let me,